Ladies and gentlemen, the Minnesota History Museum is currently running an amazing exhibit on the Hmong. But tonight, we have something even better. Who better to speak of the Hmong experience during the Secret War than someone who was actually there and fought side by side with our fathers? A CIA operation officer, he witnessed some of the heaviest fightings and was one of the last 4 Americans to leave Long Chain. I am especially excited to announce our keynote speaker tonight, Mr. James E. Parker. Mr. Parker has led a successful military career, 32 years in the CIA, 2-year Army officer. He is also an author, instructor, and lecturer. He has been awarded the Purple Heart, the Bronze Star for Valor, and the CIA Certificate for Distinction. Just to name a few. His latest book, The Vietnam War and Its Own Self, contains considerable details, picture on the Hmong fighters and the close support workers and how they contribute greatly to the Hmong victory on Skyline. And tonight he has brought us his book here, The Vietnam War, Its Own Self here. And we would like to ask you for your support and for your interest in here. And tonight, before we close here, we leave here, you may talk to him and speak with him, and he will be glad to autograph for you and help you out. And it's a means for him to go back home too. And welcome, Mr. Parker.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here. I speak Southern English, so you maybe have some Southerners at your table to help translate. I was one of about 25 CIA case officers that worked with Hmong out of Long Chen over the 15 years or so that we had an arrangement between the CIA and Hmong. It's my privilege to be back here to sort of give you an accounting of the Secret War itself, to demystify that a little bit, and to talk about the battle for Skyline Ridge, 71 to 72, in which all the different tribes, all the different groups that you've met here today. But in regards to the 3 groups that have been introduced to you, I'd like to make my comments from the CIA vantage. The FAGs, also the FACs, and Red Dog Control were Hmong that, this thing doesn't like me, I don't think. They were Hmong that talked with the Air Force, and they coordinated between what the Air Force resources were available and the fighting on the ground. This thing is slipping, you know. Okay. They did a fantastic job. When you realize the power of the Air Force, the jets that worked the mountains, how inexact the coordinates were. When you had a team on the ground in contact, relaying that information up to Cricket, the Air Force platform, or to the fast movers, or to the Sandys, you had to have good coordination. You had to have somebody with common sense on the telephone talking to the Air Force, because if you didn't have common sense, then you could give a bad reading on where the bad guys were, and that Air Force that you're asking to help you will actually come in and hurt you. The FAGs and the FACs and Red Dog Control did an absolutely amazing jobs, especially the FACs. The FACs were the guys that rode in the back seats of the Ravens. Not long after I went up to Long Chen, I took a ride with a Raven over the PDJ, scared the hell out of me. I've probably never been as afraid of anything in my life as I was that hour flight in a little OD-1 plane over the PDJ. I'm a ground pounder, an infantry guy, my feet on the ground, and we were flying over concentrations of North Vietnamese. We were flying over positions where I knew they had AAA. And H. Ormsby, who was the Raven, he was just chatting away, like just, you know, another day in the office. And I was back there, I couldn't breathe. I was that afraid. And those facts, every day, went out and got in the backseat of those planes. When I was on the ground with my unit, I had first the village militia and then GM21. And we had contact or we needed support. You would call for a Raven. And whatever Raven was in the area would come over. And if it was a ongoing fight, then you would give the Raven the coordinates, and you try and get it directed, follow that ridge line here or there, and they would dive down towards the action to try and get return fire, so they would know where to put the smoke to bring in the jets. So these facts, every day when they went to work, they would fly in this little plane that would go out and try and draw fire. They wanted out to have people shoot at them. That was their job. As for close support, as I talk about the battle for Skyline Ridge, I want to tell you how important they were. Close support, I mean, the term doesn't begin to tell you how important of a job they did. So maybe I'll repeat this later on, but I want to tell you the job that close support did. The North Vietnamese had swept our forces off the PDJ, and they were on the other side of Skyline Ridge. We had the Skyline Intercept team. Are they here now? Anybody that was on the Skyline team? Must be some here. What their job was they had these antennas that they would focus towards enemy conversation. Anytime they'd hear an enemy radio, now this is on top of Skyline Ridge, and they are facing out towards the enemy, trying to pick up their conversation. And they would record it on a little videotape, not a videotape, audio tape. And that night, at the end of the day, they would give it to an Air America pilot who would bring it down to the ramp and give it to Air Ops. Moose would come by about sundown. He would pick up all those tapes. It was not only from Skyline team, but other teams around. And he would take him up to this little area he had where we had 3 Vietnamese interpreters. And they would get those tapes like 6 o'clock at night, and they would work all night. When the sun came up the next morning, there was one of those 3 that was especially gifted in taking loose telephone conversation and making something out of radio conversation and making something out of it. He could draw a whole probable scenario from chit-chat back and forth about resupply. In the morning, when the sun came up, Moose would go by those 3 Vietnamese interpreters and pick up the tape from what was captured the day before by close support, and he would take it down to the Raven Hut. And the Raven Hut would look at it. They call them moose grounds. They would look at it and say, yep, yesterday this is where we bombed. And this guy is talking about his unit up the hill, catching hell. And he'd say, okay, that's what we're going to hit today. They could almost program what they were going to do by the intercept they got about the action the previous day. And that's pretty timely information. And in the case of our fight for Skyline Ridge, maybe it was the deciding factor that made us hold that ridge line. It's because the pilots went out every day almost with predetermined targets about where they were the bad guys. In doing this book of mine, I had the good fortune of having a close friend who was a Vietnamese linguist. And as we were researching the battle for Skyline Ridge, he translated about 700 pages of the North Vietnamese account of what happened when they attacked the Hmong and General Vang Pao. And one of the generals, General An, Nguyen An, said it was just terrible. It was terrible. They bombed us every day. We'd run and hide and then bomb us again, not knowing. And he did not know that was because of close support. It was tracking these people every day. Because, and the Vietnamese said this, they had terrible radio discipline. So we knew day to day, and we bombed the hell out of them. One of the reasons we won that battle for Skyline Ridge was because of close support. The other is the ops assistant. As I said, I was one of 20 or 25 CIA case officers that worked with Hmong. Hired into the agency, we knew our job was going to be dangerous at times. When we were in Laos, we were doing paramilitary work, which made us out. we were spies. If we'd been captured, maybe we could have been executed. But our ears, certainly when we first got there, our common sense belonged with our ops assistants. I had VAAJ to begin with, and then Pal's brother, VANG. And I'm a country boy from North Carolina. And here suddenly I'm in the mountains of Laos. Suddenly I'm in the Hmong Empire. And I would go out to my unit every day with VAAJ and VANG, and the helicopter would leave me off and would leave. I am the only white guy out there. And the only guy that kept me alive, and the only guy that made me of any value at all was my ops assistant. I retired from the agency in '92. I was called back after 9/11, and I spent 2010 and 2011, fairly recently, in Afghanistan, realizing all over again the difficulty of being effective, using a translator to accomplish ops missions. It's one thing to use an interpreter to try and translate some information, but when you're trying to achieve a mission, when you're trying to do something, when you're trying to get information and play with that information and decide on a course of action, you need somebody who is more than an interpreter. You need an ops assistant. And the Americans, we speak in colloquial, we have all these little phrases that conveys, not literally, but it conveys our meaning. In Afghanistan, the problem that I had is the same problems that I had eventually back in Vietnam, is that the interpreters would try and translate everything literally. So as you're trying to work in operation, as you're trying to deal with men in combat, when you're trying to get the patrol moving, or Vang Pao is giving orders and you're trying to execute that, you cannot be effective if your ops assistant is not just in step with you. And after a year or so, Nia Vang and I were just lockstep. He would almost anticipate what I wanted. Another great value to me, a CIA guy, flying, and I didn't speak Hmong, but flying out on a helicopter or a porter and getting ready to land, how do we know? And the battlefield sometimes had a clear line, but often the battlefield was sort of out there. When the Pathet Lao and the North Vietnamese are sort of out there. And how do you know the place where you want to go is controlled or it's been overrun? And maybe overrun and they've got somebody on the radio telling you it's safe. When I was working with the village militia, we would land at 12 outlying villages every day. How would I know that it was safe to go in? Well, that was because of VAAJ. And later with GM21, we would go out to one position or the other. How would I know that it was safe to go in here if we didn't control the ridge lines? And I wanted the helicopter to go in low. I would have to depend on Nia Vang. Nia, can we go in there? Is it safe? And he would talk to the guy on the ground and we decided if it's safe or not. And you had to, another thing, in the morning when the sun came up, Neil would be at my side and we'd go down to the rim. And you'd usually get a helicopter for whatever work you had to do that day. And those helicopter pilots were mean son of bitches. To fly for Air America, you had to eat rocks or something, to make you that mean. Because just like those facts that went and tried to draw fire to do their jobs, those Air America guys had worked for 5 or 6 years in the battlefield. Not only in the battlefield, but they had those unarmed helicopters, and they were going out to supply the Hmong or to insert Hmongs here or there. And they did not tolerate BS. When you went out and you talked to an Air America pilot, you better know what you're talking about, or they're not going to fly for you. Kayak, one of the great case officers of that 20 or 25, he had trouble with it because he would sometimes stretch the truth, or he would forget to tell the Air America guys about a 12-7 machine gun that was somewhere. So Kayak had his trouble sometimes getting Air America. I never had a problem, and one of the reasons was because of my ops assistant, Nia Vang. So for whatever words whatever your understanding of the opposite system, they made the CIA prosecution of the war possible. Without them, we were dead in the water. What I'd like to do now is show you some slides. First, of when who's going to advance this thing? Where's Pal? I just think he hit the down button. I got a clicker? Super. The chair.
Perfect.
No, let me say that. Right there. How do you do it? Yeah. This is the area of that we worked in Laos. This, if you were born in the United States, or if you're really not aware of things, then you can see that Long Chen was southwest of the PDJ. The PDJ is only about 200 miles from Hanoi. The area that Vang Pao and Toby Lee Fong were both born and raised in Nong Het. And Nong Het is just to the right of the PDJ. You can see Nong Het, right? You can see about where that road is up here. All the way up to Sam Nua, and then close to. Oh, they can hear me. You guys hear me? No. Yeah, she's nodding there in the back. That's Pao Vang. He's my son. He's Nia's brother. And Nia, one day I was at the ramp, and Nia said, "We got to go by and pick up my brother." I said, "Why?" And Nia said, "Well, he's going to be living with you down in Vientiane." And I said, "Well, that's damn news to me." But Pao did. He came down and lived with my wife and our two kids in Vientiane for 72. So you see the area, and you see where it is. It's 200 miles from Hanoi. And the thing that really protected the Hmong people from the North Vietnamese are the mountains that really don't show up on that thing, on this map. But these are the people that I worked with. These are shots that I took. That's down in the village south of Long Chen. That's somebody who was walking through the Sky compound. That's a lady. I think she's coming to the market. Another gentleman, I don't know. But if you'll notice that there's something proud about these people. You know, I had trouble later on to explain what it is. Maybe it's the way they looked you in the eye, which wasn't the way the Vietnamese were, or the Thais so much. They were very sort of evasive, but the Hmong would look you in the eye. That's a shaman and some guys. This is on the ramp at Long Chen. A group of people. Sometimes ladies would wait for 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 days for a plane to go out to one of their villages, and then wait. But these guys are courting. You can tell that. I mean, whatever language or whatever culture, those guys are hitting on those girls. Here's another couple that was walking out where I was sometime, and another young girl. But you see the pride, the integrity in these people. Now, that lady wasn't looking at me, but that's Nia Vang's mother-in-law, and that's a cousin. I think he lives in Florida now. Another lady that just happened to pass away. This is right in the middle of where the CIA stayed at Long Chen. Another lady down in the valley. I want to I don't know how much time I have. How much time do I have? I want to tell a little bit about why it was a secret war. Does anybody know why it was a secret war?
Why?
Thank you for asking. But let's start back in we got to stop back in 1953. After the Second World War, the French came back. The French were kicked out. The Japanese occupied Vietnam during the Second World War. Japanese lost that war. They went back to Japan. The French came back. The Viet Minh were organized under Giap. And from 1945 until about 1950, the Viet Minh really took it in the butt. They really got their ass kicked by the French. But the French lost about 90,000 men in that 5 years, from 45 to about 1950. And the French, after a while, got tired of fighting. They had fought the Second World War, and they were getting their butt kicked in Indochina. And by 1951 or 52, they had stopped being aggressive in their operation to catch the Viet Minh, and were just reacting to Viet Minh initiatives. In 1953, they noticed that the Viet Minh were gathering along the Lao border. And the French said, I'm going to walk away from this one.
Take the mic.
The French. Oh shit. Excuse me. The French had 3 divisions lined up near Sam Ngoc. You see the middle X in the arrows? They had 1 division down right across from Nong Het. They had another division, the 316th, to the far north. They called it was obvious to the French that in Indochina that they were going to attack Laos. So what the French did is they sent in one of their best French Foreign Legion regiments into Sam Ngoc to fight off the 3 divisions. Well, the regiment arrived. Regimental commander realized once he got on the ground the 3 divisions of Viet Minh was more than he could handle. Plus, he said it was undefendable because they were in the low ground. Sam Ngoc was in the low ground. He said the North Vietnamese controlled the highland of the high ground next to Vietnam. They couldn't survive. So he ordered the planes back, and they left. And he told the French commander in Vientiane, you can't defend Sam Ngoc. So the French commander told everybody in Sam Ngoc to leave. When Gap got the information that the French had been told to leave Sam Ngoc and to evacuate, head back, first thing he did is he sent that division in towards Dinh Quanville as a blocking force. Second thing he did is he sent runners from all 3 divisions he had after those people who had left Sam Ngoc. And they captured and killed almost every single person. There were very few survivors, French, Hmong, or the Lao, that survived the 3 division assault when they left Sam Ngoc. The division at the north was trying to go down the Nam Ngoc River to the Nam O, and the Nam O River they wanted to go down to Luang Prabang. They ran into 2 French installations, were not very successful, and pulled back. Took them too long. The people back home were again tired, and the news media went against them about the loss of all the lives at Sam Ngoc, and the French were ready to bug out. They sent a new commander to Vietnam. The first thing he found out was that they were building up forces to go down to Luang Prabang again, that topmost place, and that was Dinh Dinh Phu. That was the valley of Dinh Dinh Phu. So he tried to set up a garrison in Dinh Dinh Phu to stop the Vietnamese from going down the Nam Ong and then the Nam O all the way to Luang Prabang. And that's where the war came to an end. Because it became obvious after a while to everybody concerned, if the French lose Dinh Dinh Phu, they're going to give up Vietnam. And Gap understood that. So he was fighting, he told his people, for the country of Vietnam. Win Dinh Dinh Phu, he said, and we win Vietnam. And they won in April of 1954. There was a convocation in Geneva, and they divided what was remaining of all of Vietnam, the 17th parallel. North Vietnam, heavily populated North Vietnam. It had about 3 times the people in South Vietnam, which was below the 17th parallel. But they said, okay, we're going to divide it here, but we're going to have elections in 1957. Well, there's no way the U.S. is going to agree to that because 2/3 of the people live to the north. They're going to lose the election. So they didn't agree to it, but they did like the petition. Now, when at 54, the road from Vietnam, the Ho Chi Minh Trail into South Vietnam took 6 months to traverse. To go in from North Vietnam to South Vietnam, 6 months. But as soon as that 54 Geneva Accord was signed, they started improving that road coming down. In 54, among the agreements too, and that is that Laos got its independence. Suddenly Laos was free. Laos was an invention of the French in the first place, and being free, they didn't know what to do with being free. Always before, Laos was run by the French. So it became Wild Wild West. Somebody said there at one time between 54 and 1960, he said, if you think you know what's going on in Laos, you just don't know the facts. One of the CIA case officers there was named Stu Medford. I didn't know Steve Medford then, but I met him later in his career. And he graduated from MIT. He was smart on smart. Plus he had a criminal degree of charm. Stu Medford could charm you off the shirt off your back when it was cold outside. Stu Medford had a smile and a way with him. You needed to check your wallet and your watch after you got finished with it. But he was a smart guy, and he was out there in Laos trying to do his CIA mission of trying to come to grips with what was going on with Laos. Eisenhower was our president. He was looking for some way to stop the Vietnamese incursion. Stu went to Ban Ban. He had heard there was a Hmong named Vang Pao who had worked with the French. Stu, he's still alive and he lives in Belgium. The last time I talked to Stu, he said when he first came into where Vang Pao was, he spotted him. Nobody had to introduce who in this crowd was Vang Pao, who was in charge. He said the man had charisma and he had presence. Where when Vang Pao stood there, he was bigger than anybody else. He was bigger than people his same size. And they developed a friendship in Ban Ban. He went up to Nong Phet once to visit him. Vang Pao wanted an ambulance. Somebody's going to have to tell me sometime why Vang Pao was so anxious for an ambulance. But one of Stu's great advantages is that he could type well. And he was a hell of a persuasive, he was a charmer, but he wrote English in a very persuasive manner. So he had sold Vang Pao to Washington in 1960 or so, when Kong Lee, the neutralist, with Soviet support, attacked Dien Bien. And General No Savant came up from Savannah Cat, and Kong Lee went to the PDJ with his forces. Soviets were supplying them. Soviet transport planes were landed on the PDJ. The chief of our division in the CIA went out to Dien Bien. What can be done? Bill Laird went up and he met Vang Pao. He had book on Vang Pao from Stu Medford. Stu Medford, who was this very bright guy, and Vang Pao had established a good relationship. Bill Laird came up, established a good relationship, and they came to a division of labor. Bill Laird came back and wrote a proposal back to Washington for a covert ops. The CIA does a number of jobs. One, we go overseas and we collect intelligence, and we supply that back to the executive branch for the president or for war planners or for our national security advisors to deal with. Without the CIA's intelligence, they would be without eyes overseas. We also do covert ops. Sometimes when the president wants something done outside the realm of intelligence, but certainly within the realm of doing something secret, he will write a covert ops approval. When Bill Laird came back in December of 1960, after having that very good meeting with Vang Pao, it went over to General Eisenhower. Eisenhower was leaving. Nixon had been beaten by Kennedy. Kennedy's coming in to be president. One of the last acts that Eisenhower did was to sign a CIA covert ops approval, which gave the CIA the authority to work with Vang Pao in fighting the communists. Because when that was signed, there were Soviet transport planes that were on the PDJ. Now, the exact wording of that covert ops, I never seen, and I think it's probably still classified. Getting that kind of information from the CIA is almost impossible. I would like to have seen what the authorization was, what the commitment was. I think from Vang Pao's side, he said, we have a democratic culture. He said, we have naibons that we elect. If the naibon doesn't do his job, we kick him out. Naibons, and we just will not have anybody tell us what to do. We want a voice. We will not lend ourselves, give ourselves up to the communists, because that gives up our freedom. And we will fight with you. You supply us with weapons, you supply us with training, and we will fight the communists. So, and that was the covert ops that Eisenhower signed. And that was the VANG POW that Stu met, and the VANG POW, a little bit older, that Bill Laird met. 19 June 1961 is important in American history because it was the day before Kennedy was inaugurated. And he went to the White House for his last turnover meeting with Eisenhower. And he asked Eisenhower, tell me, he didn't ask him then, it had been prepared for Eisenhower to tell Kennedy some of the most important things that he was going to deal with. The very first thing on his agenda was Laos. The number one thing Eisenhower talked about 19 June 1961 was Laos. He said, you cannot let the communists control Laos because the communists in North Vietnam want to take South Vietnam. If you keep them out of Laos, you keep them to the 17th parallel, which is only 60 miles wide. Deny Laos to the communists is what Eisenhower said to Kennedy 19 June 1961. Eisenhower said that as a former military commander, former supreme military commander. Kennedy heard it as a politician. But about this time, Bill Laird, who is senator back there, and the Perus went up to Padang. I think I heard somebody mention in Padang early, where they started to train the Hmong to follow up that their commitment to fighting the communists. And the Hmong really took to it. Well, an interesting sort of side note to that. So they've got the Hmong coming in. They didn't have much training. We had a big armory in Okinawa. We had M1s and we had carbines. So they said, well, they're probably going to want more carbines than they want M14s. They're probably going to want carbines more than M14s. So they sent most of the rifles out as carbines. You know what your fathers wanted? They wanted the M14. It was bigger. So the carbines weren't worth much. They had to trade them in eventually for M14s and eventually M16s. But the force that VANG POW put together were sometimes young, but they were very effective. This young man has an M16, so he's a later troop. My troops, with my GM, used more hand grenades than they did rifles. At night, throwing hand grenades down a hill, which would roll down a hill, didn't leave a burst to show where you were. So we supplied, for a resupply after a firefight, there would be an enormous amount of grenades, not so much in the way of weapons. The 1962, now Kennedy has got Eisenhower's word, deny Laos to the communists. So he sent William Harriman and Bill Sullivan over to Geneva, and they struck a beautiful deal for the communists in which they said no military forces in Laos. The U.S. signed that because it was their idea. Soviets signed it and said, sure, we'll sign anything, because there was no way to police it. There was no way to enforce that. So we pulled our military out of Laos. The North Vietnamese did not. So how are we going to do it? How are we going to support VANG POW? And that's where the CIA paramilitary case officers came in. So the first two was Tony Poe and Vince Lawrence. If you know your Hmong history, Tony Poe was crazy. He was a crazy son of a bitch. He was the outrider. He would go out to different Hmong positions, sit on the top, and he had no fear. I mean, he just had no fear. He was wounded 2 or 3 times. Vince Lawrence had graduated from Princeton. He came, he spoke good French. He came into the Valley and worked with VANG POW. But from here on out, because the United States had signed the 1962 Geneva Accord, said no military forces in Laos, because Kennedy and everybody else after that was committed in trying to protect Laos from the communists, it became a secret war. No military uniforms allowed, only CIA paramilitary working with the locals. And that's where the secret came from. That's why it was secret. We were not accountable. We didn't allow anybody up to Long Chin. There was no road up to Long Chin. You had to fly in. When Eisenhower approved the covert action, we went out and we developed Air America with the helicopters. We had the Ravens. The Ravens didn't come until later, but we got a commitment from the Air Force to give us support, and the war was on. From 62 until about 68, this was the fight. That's George Taylor, a good friend of mine. These are the Hueys. They were used almost exclusively in Long Chin because it was so high up. They have a lot of pull. The H-34s were helicopters that were used in other parts of Laos. There is a Chinook, that's up at Boom Long, for you guys that remember Boom Long, the Site 32. There is Burr, another CIA case officer. This is on the PDJ with Vang Pao, and he's maneuvering. And an interesting thing, too, about the way we managed this war. Who was in charge? Vang Pao was in charge. He was in charge because he was such a masterful statesman, because he knew how to work with the French, and he knew how to work with the Americans. And we believed in Vang Pao. Every day he went to war. Every day when he woke up, he didn't sleep a lot at night, but he would leave his compound and he would go out for war. And we trusted Vang Pao. Our biggest adversary often was bureaucratic Washington. He'd get in and to fall in line. Rarely, sometimes we did, but rarely did we go against Vang Pao's judgment in the way to deploy the forces, where to bring in U.S. Air Force, and how to prosecute the war against the Pathet Lao and also the North Vietnamese. Now, the North Vietnamese did not leave Laos. They did not leave this area in which Vang Pao had committed himself and the Hmong to fight. What they did do, the North Vietnamese, is they joined the Pathet Lao units. Sometimes the Pathet Lao units would be half North Vietnamese, half Pathet Lao. But things began to change in, there's some men from my GM, and they're good men, every one of them. You look at those guys. You get in a tight place, you'd want those guys behind you. This is a helicopter, single helicopter coming in to pick up a patrol. Again, you have to admire, you just take your hat off to those Air America guys that would go into those unprotected areas based on what an ops assistant told a case officer. If it's safe, and they would go in. If the Air America helicopter believed the case officer, and the case officer believed his ops assistant, and we lost some helicopters, but we didn't lose many. In 1968, things changed. Number one, Lee Lu graduated from water pump in Udon, and he became the first Hmong T-28 pilot. Vang Pao had T-28s before Lee Lu was the first Hmong to go up and support the Hmong at Long Chin. But a lot of them were Lao, and the others were Thai, and they were called high flyers. I don't know whether that's a term, Rich, that you used. Vang Pao would ask them to bomb an area, and they would bomb it, but they'd be up here, and the target would be down there. Once he got his Hmong pilots coming in, they were low flyers, and Vang Pao would demand that they come in low to drop the ordnance that would be more effective. Am I right, glass man?
Yes.
The Hmong T-28 pilots were the heroes of the Hmong nation. They would land sometimes short on the runway after they had graduated. They'd throw the canopy back, they'd throw their scarf out the window, and the people in Long Chin Valley would be applauding them as they came down. They were loved by the Hmong people. But most of them were killed because of VP's insistence that they fly low. Vang Pao, Lee Lu died after 18 months of flying. They figured he had flown about 3,000 missions. He would sometimes fly 5 missions a day. 5 missions a day. Is that a lot, Rich? That's a ton of missions. That means he's loading up with bombs. He's going out where the Hmong are. He's finding the enemy and he's dropping the bombs. And he's coming back empty. 5 times a day for a year and a half he did that. And finally, but Rich, I don't think it was in Quangville. I think it was up at Mong Sui where he was knocked down. But you could be right. Johnson, Ted in Vietnam, Johnson presidency is is dead, Nixon comes in. The significance of that is that Johnson is the one that first started the war. All of his people leave, and Nixon comes in with all new people. There's nobody responsible for the war anymore. And the Vietnamese, I think, sense that. So they stop their tactics of going with the Pathet Lao, and they began to attack the Hmong in mainline units. So the rules of the war were changed. They were different. Where Vang Pao, being a crafty, cunning guy, just a gifted general, could figure ways to use his guerrillas to fight these Pathet Lao units, most of the time being successful. He was no match for the 312th and the 316th Pavan divisions that came about knocking. But in 1968, in the summer of 1960, Operation About Face. Anybody remember About Face? Anybody hear stories about Face? Oh, the officers still. But Vang Pao took his Hmong force and he swept the PDJ, took remnants of all the Pathet Lao and kicked them off. Sent them running east, and they recovered just tons and tons and tons and tons of supplies. So 69, we knew that the Vietnamese were going to come back with a vengeance. One, Vang Pao was correct about Operation About Face. He knew he could rip the shirts of those guys and kick them off the PDJ. He did not know it was going to happen at a time when the North Vietnamese were reassessing what they were going to do. So that pissed them off. About Face did. So when they came back in 69, we had our special intelligence, and we knew they were getting divisions, supported by divisions to come in. So we asked the Thais for support. And the Thais came in and said, there's Lee Lu. Lee Lu is that handsome guy to the right. That's his T-28. I want to come back to that. In 69, we didn't bring in, the Thais agreed to send one of their regiments up. So a Royal Thai Army regiment came up to Vang Pao. And you know where Vang Pao put them? At Ba Na, Lima Site 15, which is due north. So that was bait. He was trying to divert the North Vietnamese from heading Long Chen, and he was successful. It was the North Vietnamese 165th Regiment that attacked that Royal Thai Army, most of the regiment, and 2 fire bases at Ba Na, and they kicked the hell out of them. They battered them from post, and the Royal Thai Army they were good soldiers, but they were just overwhelmed by the North Vietnamese. Kayak was the guy that was flying up when he could get a helicopter to fly him, an Air America helicopter. There's so many dead Thai accumulated, they tried to use a net with a helicopter and get them out, which turned into a disaster because some bodies started falling out of the net as they left. What was happening about the same time is that in the South, we developed a special CIA force of Thai soldiers. There were 500 irregular Thai soldiers that were hired off the streets of Bangkok. Some of them had just gotten out of prison. Most of them did not have a military background. We collected those in 500-man units. The U.S. Special Forces trained them in Cantonapuri. We got in 50 NCOs and officers from the Royal Thai Army, 550-man units, and we sent them up. This is the unit of these irregulars that we sent up to bail out the Royal Thai Army at Ba Na, and they did a good job. And they went up there and they kicked the 165th back to the PDJ. So that's the picture in 1970. We've suddenly got a new unit because we knew that Vang Pao, with the Hmong, could not fight mainland North Vietnamese forces. So we were bringing in these special Thai mercenaries, not Thai mercenaries, Thai army with Thai officer, 550-man units. Now, this is a thing, it's in my book, but it's just been released by the CIA. And the reason is that the covert ops that Eisenhower signed back in 1960 probably didn't include this. So the CIA was concerned about releasing this information when it was sort of outside the bounds of the original covert ops. So we had 2 of these special units at Ba Na, and we moved out. Here's one of them. This is the 609th. getting their training. This is right before they graduate. That's most of the 609. That's mostly 550 people. And we send them back to the PDJ. And Vang Pao's construction of the defense of the PDJ, he put, like I'm tied to this thing. To the right were two fire bases, Mustang and Lion. And up at the top, it was King Kong. You got Panther, you got Stingray, and you got Cobra. Of the 4,000 Thai irregulars that we had, 2,000 were in Mustang and Lion. That was going to take the blunt of any North Vietnamese attack. But the early warning was GM 21 up in the north right. Can you see that in the northeast, GM 21? They did not have any dug-in positions. The Thais were dug in strongly on Putin in those two positions. In each of those 6 fire bases, the Thais had well-fortified positions, as well as we could supply them. We supplied them bulldozers, front-loaders to make the positions defendable. But the Hmong were going to be the early warnings. The GM-21 was up there, and they were at that was Digger Odell's unit. Kayak at GM-23, you could see to the left. And as we found out later, that's Lion, the unit on the right. That's the PDJ. This is a gunfire. General Gap is the one that helped devise the plan to attack these units on the PDJ. He called in General An, and he told General An, you will win at all costs. Losing is not an option. Because this is what General Gap thought. When the Viet Minh attacked the French at Dien Bien Phu, they thought if they beat the French there, they would own Vietnam, and that happened. They thought if they attacked and won against Vang Pao's forces on the PDJ, they would own Laos. And that was probably true. Gap estimated 80% of Vang Pao's forces were on the PDJ. So he told An, maybe the An is my next picture. Here's General An. General An was one of the best North Vietnamese generals. He took Lane 2, Dien Bien Phu. You might remember we were soldiers once in Young, Lieutenant Colonel Moore, in the Ai Drang Valley of Vietnam. It was An that fought him. An was General Gap's first go-to guy. When he had a tough job, when he had a tough attack, he would call on General An. So he called General An to his house and said, you will go, you will kill Vang Pao's forces, you will occupy Long Chin. And he gave him those orders in the summer of 1971. So An went down and he saw there were 2 divisions that had been collected. Altogether 27,000 North Vietnamese with 130 guns, with tanks, with sapper units. And he was encouraging one unit about their part in this plan that was being developed, about being aggressive and don't hesitate and move and attack and keep moving. And some guy got General An off to the side later on. He said, General An, you're not attacking the Vietnamese puppet in South Vietnam. You're attacking Vang Pao. You ought to be a little more careful. But An kept up his optimism. He thought with 27,000 men against the basically 4,000 we had on the PDJ, which represented 80% of Vang Pao's forces, he thought he had enough to do the job. When Gap said, losing is not an option, he thought, no sweat, we got it. There's Colonel Chung. In reading those 700 pages of after-action reports from the North Vietnamese, you get a sense of the North Vietnamese that were writing. You can. I mean, you can read it and sort of, if the guy, sometimes you can see he had compassion. Sometimes he felt the orders were crazy. This guy was crazy. This was one crazy son of a bitch. And he had the 165th. And they were going to lead the North Vietnamese. And I think that was the reason they had this guy, leading the North Vietnamese attack on the Vang Pao's forces on the PDJ. Colonel Chung. He started with a full regiment of 1,800 men. He ended the campaign with 20. That's how crazy. And he had no compassion. And reading his after-action report, he lost what? 1,780 men. And he had no remorse. There was no grief at all in the way he described that. This is Whiskey 2. He was a Thai FAG, You know, like the Hmong facts or with the Hmong units. This was a Thai fact. He was on top of Lion Air Base. So this was the main attack of the North Vietnamese. This is their plan. Those 2,000 men in Lion and Mustang, they were going to take those two positions first. Then they were going to take King Kong in the north, and they thought the rest of them would fall. 2,000 men Vang Pao had in those two positions. On 18 December 1971, Colonel Chung led the attack on BC 609. That unit you saw him on the parade field, he led his division against that force. And they fought all day long. We lost 2 F5s that day. We lost 1 T-28, but they held on. GM-21, when they were hit, remember GM-21 up in the Northeast? When they were hit, it was 1 battalion. I think it was 201. I was talking with somebody about 201. They tried to make their way down to BC 609, and the North Vietnamese thought they were coming in to attack. So most of the unit in GM-21, I think it was 201 battalion, was captured by the North Vietnamese. So 18 December, they attacked all day. When the sun went down, 18 December, we had lost 3 aircraft, the T-28, but we held every one of the positions. That night, Chong was reading Special Intercept. They heard about the planes going down. They heard about U.S. Air Force going on a SAR, because the Air Force will do that. You lose a plane, and they lost, I said 2, they lost 3 on 18 December. They were going all out. So they thought that was going to be, take the Air Force off. So he said, let's change the plan. Let's attack and let's take Lion tomorrow on the 19th. So 18th they attacked, he got the orders to do it, and he committed his forces on 19th, and they took them. Here's some of the forces that were captured. When the sun went down on 19 December, they owned the PDJ. They took Lion, they took Mustang, they took King Kong, and the other Thai positions pulled out. Of the 4,000 forces Vang Pao had in the PDJ that day, DC either captured or killed probably 2,000. Here's some of the being herded. These are obviously loud kids, soldiers from GM-21 that they were captured back, sent back to North Vietnam. Most of them were never seen again. So the fight now is suddenly, I mean, do we give it up and go home? Does Vang Pao say, okay, you killed my forces? No, he did not. He said, we fall back to, let's see, we fall back to Long Chin and we will defend Skyline. So we set up positions on the top. To the far right is Charlie Tango, and that's where Kayak and the commandos, Hmong commandos were. We had 2 more units of Thai irregulars in Charlie Alpha, Charlie Whiskey, and Charlie Bravo. We had people, and then down at the base, and that was going to be the last defense. Back in Washington D.C., I've got intercept where Kissinger is talking to Nixon, and he's telling Nixon, he said, "There's not much hope. There's almost no forces left to stop the North Vietnamese." And that was about 22 December. On 25 December, the night, Christmas night, sappers came into the valley. Sappers came into the valley. They got into the middle of the village and they just shot anybody they could. Killed them, we think, all of them. Maybe some got away. But all the sappers were killed, most of them by the civilians. What was the purpose of the sapper attack? It was to get the civilians to leave. There's no question. They were not trying to kill soldiers. They were trying to get the Hmong civilians in Long Chin to leave. On December the 31st, New Year's Eve, the 130s, these are the positions on top of Skyline. The 130s started shooting into the valley. They had a range of 23 miles. When the round would land anywhere close to you, your teeth would hurt. The concussion was so bad. And they were landing throughout the valley. On January the 6th, January the 7th, the North Vietnamese had captured the top of Skyline. January the 14th, the front page of the paper in Hanoi, if you can read Vietnamese, it says, "We have captured Skyline, we own Long Chin, Laos is ours." That's verbatim. I'm reading the headlines here. I'm not either. That's what people have said. But it was in 2 newspapers. Skyline is fallen. We occupy Long Chin, Laos is ours. It didn't happen. One of the reasons it didn't happen, Lucky, where's Lucky? Lucky and I were talking about before. Lucky and Suayang and Hog were talking about the North Vietnamese that were on the other side of the ridgeline. And they said there are only so many places they can hide over there. So Hog asked for 3 B-52 strikes right on the other side of the Skyline. And they sent it to B-52 headquarters, and they came back the next night and said, "We can't do it, it's too close." Hog said, "We gotta have it." And Lucky, what they said, maybe yes, maybe no. 5 January, 3 B-52s unloaded in a small area on the other side of Long Chin. And they wiped out one whole regiment. The 866 Cabin Regiment was no more. Killed a whole regiment. Some of the kayaks people went from Charlie Tango down after the 3 B-52 strike the next day, and they found debris where just dozens of people had been blown away. They also didn't take Skyline on 14 January, like the news said, because a unit from Savannah Cat went up and kicked those sappers out of the top of Charlie Whiskey. They did not take Skyline by January the 14th because of close support. And we knew when they were moving down. And we bombed them and we bombed them. And it wasn't just scattered random harassment fire. We were going after the units. Not only that, but Chong had just chewed up his forces in attacking Lima and Mustang. Plus, Chong told his people and other to climb over Pukatay to get to, there's the B-52. That was the commander who took the, he ordered the people, don't take the trail, climb over the mountain. It took them 6 days. And they didn't carry extra supplies. The food they carried was what they carried on the back. The ammunition was what they could carry in their guns. Because they expected just to roll over the top of the Skyline. Well, one of the problems they had, one of the major problems, is that the Hmong civilians would not leave. Another thing the Hmong would do, the Vang Pao especially, every time that you killed a sapper, he would cut their stomach open. And that was to look in their stomach to see if they were well fed and to see what they had been eating. If it looked like they were starving or if they were sort of desperate, that would bring some different conclusions. But if they were well fed, that also bring different conclusions. But the word got back to North Vietnamese. Those people are dangerous. Those people are actually amount to a 5,000 person force in the valley. You may take out the top of the Skyline, but those people are not going to leave down there. Lucky and I were talking about it. There towards the end, 5,000 Hmong stayed behind. 5,000. Those 130 rounds were landed. North Vietnamese and sappers were at the top, and the Hmong civilians stayed. So when you talk about your heroes, they were the people that did the fighting, but it was also the Hmong who stayed. This was their land. Vang Pao told them to stay. Hog was there every night with them, and they didn't leave. Some of them were merchants, and there was too much stuff to carry. Others just said, I ain't going. You know, Hmongs can be that way sometimes. They just get an idea in their head, and they aren't going to move. Some of the Hmong were that persuasive. I ain't leaving. So the North Vietnamese had this proposition, these people that just wouldn't leave. You can't occupy a place like that if you think there are 5,000 civilians that are going to cut your stomach open. But the war is still to be fought. And Ann was there with orders to win at all costs. So they got to Skyline, they couldn't get over the ridge line when they promised it, but they still had to win the war. Vang Pao went to Unor. I was at Unor at the time. Pat Landry was my boss, Jim Glarum. And he came in and he said, this is what I want to do. He said, I want to take my Hmong soldiers out of the east end of Long Chin, send them through the PDJ as if we're cutting off the supply lines. He said, these are lowland Vietnamese. They are not jungle fighters. If they think that their rear is being cut off, or if they're isolated now in the valleys around Long Chin, then they'll pull back. And people said, you're crazy. There was one guy in particular in DOD in Washington, D.C. That's the craziest idea I've ever heard, he said. You ought to go up there and thump Vang Pao and tell them to put those horses on top of the skyline and in and around that summit. Hugh Tovar was our boss. As I said, who was the ultimate boss? Who was calling the shots? And I think I knew all the personalities. I think the strongest, the most persuasive leader was Vang Pao. Vang Pao insisted it was a good idea. He convinced Hugh Tovar and overhit Washington objections that it was a good idea, and they did it. It's in and around. And you know what the North Vietnamese did? They pulled back. They sent half their units back. We won the. There's Vang Pao down when he was briefing Landry about the in and around. Here's some Hmong soldiers on the PDJ during that in and around motion. They gave us a chance to rebuild the position to bring in more Thai forces. That's Moose. You heard about Moose with close support, and that's XIONG. Here's a raven that's showing a hole. They tried to build a road down after that, a road from the PDJ to fight the war, to get over the Skyline Ridge. There are two problems with that. I don't know if that's a subtle suggestion to me to stop talking. But they built a road, the North Vietnamese, and this came from Gap. He said, you're not going to be able to get over Skyline, you're not going to be able to rouse those civilians out unless you get in more supplies. So from the bottom of Skyline, they built a road. You see the inside 72, there's a pass there, and they brought the road in, and now it was Vang Pao's decision. Where do I put all these new Thai forces? Where do I put the Thai forces? Well, he put them in this area. The Vietnamese saw that, and they found a hill. It's called 1800. And they said, what we'll do is we'll just scale this hill. Scale this hill up here, and then we'll be on the high ground over that unit. And we were listening to their stuff. They were building this road. When you build a road and you bring tanks in, it's pretty predictable where they're going to go. They're not going to move mountains. They have to stay in the lowland. So we knew that if they could climb over 1800, the hill 1800, then they would have access to Sam Tom and then to the valley. And Vang Pao said, they're not going to climb hill 1800. Tracks are not going to go up 1800. So the 700 pages of translated reports that I have, I probably have 150 pages of how they tried to climb 1800, and they didn't do it. The only way they had to use that road was to come up that valley where Vang Pao had placed the Thai soldiers. And by the time they waded through that, they were washed out. By 3 August, and there are other details. I encourage you to buy my book. If this story sounds interesting to you, and it's mostly an untold story, buy my book, and you'll hear read all the details about that. But finally, on 3 August, Johan said, no mas. He said, we lose. We have to pull back. You won. And so they pulled back. What I'm missing is we had a bossy in June and July of that year. That's hard-nosed for so many times. These are some of the dead. They were just dead North Vietnamese everywhere. You know, like you'd wake up in the morning, go out to work, and you have to step on your dead North Vietnamese. But here's the last straw was like 1 April. They tried to send 2 tanks that had made it through all those high positions. And we had planted mines in the road. This guy Hardness had planted mines and knocked out both tanks. And it was the next day that Johan said, I give up. You won. So we wanted to have Vang Pao had a massacre in June. All the tribes were there. The Hmong were there, the ops assistants, the close support, the FAGs were there, Ravens, Air America, Sky, Thai. It was, I don't know, 100 people, but we were separate like the fingers and together like the fist. But there was General Vang Pao. He was probably the greatest military commander I've ever known, and I've known a lot. You know, paramilitary has been part of my adult life. I never knew a man who, but he also knew the territory. He knew the country like nobody else. But he also had good sense. General Abrams, if you followed the Vietnam War, he came up one time to meet Vang Pao. He came away shaking his head and said, that guy's a general. That guy's field level general. But I want to have a picture. I know somebody was there. Somebody was suggesting Chet, a Thai guy, maybe the guy that took the pictures. It was we were all, in fact, working for Vang Pao with counsel. Jerry was with him all the time. Jerry sometimes, they could sometimes negotiate things. Another interesting thing about Hogg and Vang Pao. When Vang Pao was at his house in Long Chin, people could come, villagers could come if they had a beef, and Vang Pao would have open court. And Jerry would stand there and watch them. And it's amazing how the people, everybody had their say. Nobody got shut up. Everybody would, and Vang Pao would make a decision and they'd go on with it. It was democracy in its best form. So that's my story. I am a CIA case officer. I think there are only 4 of us still alive. I work with the Hmong. Pao Vang, who is Nia's younger brother, is like a son. He's back there raising his hand. You can't imagine the trust and the bond that I had with the Hmong that I worked with, because mostly it was me with my unit, and of course I could make in to the CIA unit at night. But how much I respect them, their integrity, their sense of honor, in fighting to keep their homeland. I am proud to say that we are all Americans now. We fought the good fight. And when we won, somebody was saying earlier, we lost the war. We did not lose the war. Vang Pao did not lose the war. We won that war. It was the politicians who gave it away. But I got